So this morning we are beginning a new series called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, or Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It is by a man called Pete Scazzero, and that's where we've gathered most of our material from. He says these words. Let me pull up this picture that I took of his book. He says these words: "It is impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature." It is impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. See, Scripture says these words in 2 Corinthians 5:17 that we all know, that anyone who is in Christ, see, they are a new creation. The old is gone, the new is here. Yep, we believe it, right? Some of you are unsure. We believe that truth, right? See, we are a new creation. The old is gone, the new is here. But the issue is this, that every so often for some of us, and for most of us, even though we live in that reality and we live in that truth, we like the old man. We like the way we are thinking, that every so often we go, actually, I want to put it back on. That even though we are a new creation, that we sit in this old man and we like to, it's comfortable. That when it comes to our giving, that when our finances are good, we can give. But when they get difficult, well, God, I can't trust you anymore. Let me put the old man back on. See, have you ever noticed that it's interesting that in Romans 12:2, that Paul says these words. He says, be transformed by the renewing of your, not the renewing of your spirituality, not the renewing of your faith in Jesus, but the renewing of your mind. So all of a sudden, as we're beginning to look at this, there is a question of what happens. Why does Paul realize that there is something important about us being emotionally healthy people? Let me show you an example. I have a friend who is now a retired minister. And when I was a minister in training, every year you gather for a conference. And he was one of our speakers. And he said these words. He goes, when I was a young minister, I went into a church. And whilst I was in a church, everything started going wrong. And I went, well, the people are bad. God, you haven't blessed this place. And he had all these excuses, so he went, it's time for me to move. So he moved from that church to the next church. And after a couple of months, all of a sudden, the same thing started happening. And his response was, the people are bad. The church is bad. It's time for me to move. So he moved for a third time. And as he moved this time, all of a sudden, the same thing started happening. And he stopped for a moment and he went, well, in the first church, the people were bad and the church was bad. In the second church, the people were bad and the church was bad. So in my third church, and all of a sudden he stopped and went, what is the common denominator of all those three churches? And he said these words in front of a group of young ministers. And he went, I realized the problem was me. And all of a sudden, he became emotionally healthy, and he became emotionally mature, and he began to go, wait a minute, I've gone from one church to the next, and all these churches have had the same problem, and the only person who's been in all three of those churches is me. And he said these words to us. He went, if you have a problem in a church, before you leave, fix it, because I promise it will follow you. That sometimes in our lives, there are things that we carry, and things that we carry around, and all of a sudden we realize that we are holding an old man that we were never meant to drag around with us. That all of a sudden we realize that we are standing in a pulpit in probably the hottest our building has ever been, wearing a winter coat that is more for snowboarding than it is for standing in whatever. That we realize that we're in summer and we're still in a winter coat because the old is gone and the new is here, but we're holding on to the old. And God calls us to let go and to begin to remove it. Let me show you how this works. And as we kind of go through that today, our sermon series or our topic today is the danger of emotionally unhealthy spirituality. And I want to show you through the life of Saul this morning how this all begins to piece together. And my question for you is this: what is your inner story telling you? That here we first encounter Saul in 1 Samuel 9, 1-2. And it says this: it says there was a Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah of Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul, a handsome and young man. As handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Let's pause there for a moment. So we first think this is how we encounter Saul. For those of you who maybe haven't encountered Saul before, Saul becomes the first king of Israel. But we encounter Saul here, and it says these words. That it says that Saul, there was a man of standing whose name was Kish. Kish was Saul's father. It says he was a man of standing. This means that Kish was a man of wealth. He was a man of great sort of, not a great authority, but also someone who everyone knew and everyone looked up to. That wherever you were, that if you were anyone of any place, that you knew who Kish was. That you knew he was a man of wealth, a man of standing, and a man of stature. That it's this interesting sort of moment that a man of influence, that we realize that in this moment that Saul comes from a prestigious family in Israel. Now that's important, okay? So Saul comes from a prestigious family, a well-known family, and a well-thought-of family. It says this about Saul. It says he was the most handsome man that you've ever seen. It says he was a head and shoulders above everyone else. Essentially, for all the women who are single in our church, who have made lists, he's the person you've written down. Tall, dark, and handsome. Yep. And you're all looking at me, so you haven't made a list, and you haven't put that down. But we all know. My wife had on her list a basketball player who was over 6 foot. And she got me. But we have this moment that Saul is a man that when you look at him, he stands out. Everyone goes, wow, look at Saul. He is a man of wealth, he's from money. He's from prestige. He looks nice. He is tall. That whatever he wanted, it said he was he was head and shoulders above everyone else. So when he walked into the room, we've had, over the last couple of years, I think we had a basketball player arrive every so often. And when he walked into the room, you knew him. Because he was higher than everyone else. He didn't disappear in the crowd. That when he walked, you saw him above everyone else. This is Saul. And it's interesting because all of a sudden, Saul is encountered. Samuel is told to go find Saul. Samuel is the prophet who's been leading Israel. And the Israelites start asking for a king. So he comes and so Samuel goes to find Saul. And he does all these things. Saul goes to look for donkeys and whatever else. And when Samuel invites Saul for dinner, that's it. He doesn't tell him he's going to be king. He invites him for dinner. And Saul's words are these. But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such things to me? Do you hear it? Do you hear it? Saul is a man of wealth. Saul is a man of prestige. Saul is a man who's a head and shoulders better looking than everyone else. And when the man of God comes to speak to him, what is his response? Not me. I'm not good enough. I am from the smallest tribe, or the smallest clan and the smallest tribe. You've got it wrong. It must be someone else. And all of a sudden, the story that Saul is telling himself is completely different to the truth that he's seeing. The truth is that he is a man of wealth and prestige and a man who's head and shoulders. That of course, when you're looking for a king, everyone's going, Saul is the man. But Saul is going, no, you've got it wrong. It is not me. That if he was in church with us today, we would probably go, wow, Saul, what a humble man. What a man of humility. Can you believe it? That he's been invited to the table and all of a sudden he's going, not me, you've got the wrong person. What a humble person. And sometimes we hide behind our humility because we don't know who we are. We don't know the identity that we are called to. We don't understand that we are sons and daughters of the King of Kings, that there is an identity crisis happening within Saul, and sometimes there's an identity crisis happening with us. When I grew up, I used to hear this phrase constantly. and it is truth. So before someone goes mad at me, this phrase, we are a sinner saved by grace. Have we heard that phrase before? Most of us have grown up saying it, haven't we? I'm a sinner saved by grace. When I was younger, I used to hear that verse, and I used to hear those words, I'm a sinner saved by grace, and it reminded me that every time I walked into church, every time I walked into the presence of God, I'm a sinner. And I am only here by the grace of Jesus, which is completely true. But it meant that every time that I walked in, I didn't walk into the presence of God boldly, but I walked in groveling, going, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry I've done it again. I'm sorry I'm here. I'm just a sinner. I'm not, David calls himself a worm. And I kind of have that moment. And then a couple of years later, I began to change that truth with another one. And there is another truth that we hold, that we are saints seated in righteousness. It's the same truth. The both of them are true. We are a sinner saved by grace, but we are saints seated in righteousness. And all of a sudden, when I began to declare over myself, I'm a saint seated in righteousness, that all of a sudden, when I walked into the throne room of God, when I came to my prayer time, no longer were I groveling, but all of a sudden I went, I am meant to be here. And the reason I'm meant to be here is not just because I'm a saint, but because I'm a son. And we are daughters. And because we're sons and daughters of the King of Kings, all of a sudden we approach his throne with boldness. And all of a sudden there's an identity shift that begins to happen, that begins to shift around, that we begin to have this understanding of who we are and how we begin to piece this. That can I tell you that if you never deal with your identity, if you never deal with that inner monologue, that inner story that is going on within you, it will lead to failure. That what we're going to do over these next 8 weeks is going to be work. It's going to be difficult at times. I've sat all week trying to write this sermon, and as I've been writing it, it's been painful at times. Because all of a sudden, as I've been looking at some of these things, I began to look at the inner story that's going on inside of me and going, oh God, I need to work some of this out. I need to piece some of this together. That it will take engaging with God and the Spirit. That sometimes we believe that if we've been following Jesus long enough, that we'll just automatically look like him. But actually, sometimes it takes a little bit of work on our side. Sometimes it takes us to go, actually, I need to do something here. I need to let go of some patterns and some things around us. It's interesting because when we look at Samuel, he anoints Saul as king. And it says, so 1 Samuel 10:1, it says, then Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, has not the Lord anointed you the ruler of his inheritance? That the man who was known as the voice of God comes to Saul, and he anoints him king. And for most of us in the room, we go, the moment that Saul is anointed king, he must be going, I must be the guy. Yeah? If that was you, and all of a sudden the voice of God comes to you, and he comes with oil, and he pours it on your head, and he goes, you are the one. I've heard from God, and he said it's you. You are the one who is going to lead Israel forward. In that moment, all of us go, yeah, we're ready. And we do the same. The moment we decide to follow Jesus, the old is gone. The new is here. But the problem was Saul couldn't let go of the old man. He couldn't let it disappear. It dragged around like a dead body behind him. It says these words. It said that later on, that Samuel calls all of the Israelites together. And as he calls them all together, he says, one by one, they go through the tribes, pulling out. It says that they throw lots and they pull tribe one by one to see who's going to be the next king. Now, here's the interesting part. There's 2 people who know the next king, because it's already been decided. One is Samuel, and the other is Saul, for those of you who are trying to keep up. Saul knows he's going to be king. So one is Samuel, one is Saul. Saul is, how tall is Saul? He is a head taller than everyone else. So he cannot disappear. He cannot hide in a room. It says one by one they pull them forward. And eventually they get to Kish, his family, and they pull them forward. And eventually they get to Saul. And it says, where is he? They're looking for him. They cannot find him anywhere. The man who is anointed to be king, who is head and shoulders above everyone else, he's disappeared. He's nowhere to be seen. He is still unsure that he is the man who is meant to be king. This inner monologue is still saying, Samuel, you've got the wrong person. So Samuel speaks to God and he says, where is he? And God responds, he's by the luggage. Can I tell you that if you're hiding this morning, God sees you. Whether you're by the luggage or whether you're at home hiding behind your TV or whether you're hiding at the very top of the balcony, God sees you. You cannot hide from him. He knows, and if he's put a destiny on you, he will call it forth. And it says that Saul is hiding, and they go to look at the luggage. And who is there hiding behind the bags? Saul. And he's so sure that the people are going to reject him that he rejects himself first. It says a little bit later on that as this is beginning to happen, that it begins to fall apart, that because he's so unsure that the people go, it says some scoundrels said, surely this man can't lead us. And they disappear and they reject him as king, just as Saul has already rejected himself. That when we don't believe what God says about ourselves, we let the world dominate and we let the world begin to speak over us and said that Saul decided that Samuel had got the wrong person. That this morning you may be sitting going, God, you've got the wrong person. And God is looking at you this morning going, no, I chose you. I anointed you. And I put you here for this reason. That others may be confused by why God has chosen you. And sometimes we have to learn to let the words of God shape us rather than the world around us. See, it says later that Saul's month later, he cannot begin to bring this together. He cannot begin to understand all of this, and he just gets lost, and he begins to sabotage himself time and time and time again. Peter Scazzaro, he put some language around this, and he says there are 10 ways that begin to show us that we are emotionally unhealthy. I'm going to run through these quickly because we're going to unpack them over the next couple of weeks. The first one, he says, is we use God to run from God. I keep myself busy in church activities to avoid the pain and tension I'm experiencing in my close relationships. God told me. You ever heard that phrase, God told me? I think it's one of the most dangerous phrases sometimes in church. That every so often, people begin to use it as a way of going, well, it's not my responsibility. God told me. I went home last night and I looked at the dishes and I saw a big pile of them. But God told me that I should rest and watch TV instead. So that when my wife came home and looked at the dishes and went, why did you do the dishes? My response is, God told me. And I have no responsibility in that because I am just obeying what God told me to do. That every so often I hear people say to us, God told me to come to this church. And I go, wonderful. And my next question is, why? And there's silence sometimes. And I go, well, if God told you to come here, he didn't tell you to come here. He told you to come here for a reason. And sometimes as I begin to delve into why they have moved from their church to our church, I begin to realize that something had happened in the last church. And now they're here. And rather than dealing with it, they went, well, God told me to move. Or every so often someone will come to me and say, God's told us to leave. And I have no problem with that language. But it makes it difficult for me sometimes, because sometimes I sit with the person and I go, I believe that God has spoken to you and has asked you to move somewhere else. And other times I speak to them and I go, actually, you don't want to deal with what God is doing in you now. So you've decided to move. And as soon as someone says, God told me, it's really difficult because all of a sudden as a pastor, I am not pushing back on what you are feeling on the inside. I am telling you that you didn't hear God. And that's really difficult. That sometimes in our emotionally healthy state, we use God to run from God. Number two, we ignore emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. I am rarely honest with myself and or others about our feelings, hurts, pains beneath the surface of my life. We die to the wrong things. I tend to deny healthy, God-given desires and pleasures of my life, such as friendship, joy, music, laughter, and nature. Do you know some of us believe that it's interesting because Mark has been talking about joy a whole bunch. And just after when the early church kind of came out of into, when the Roman Empire began to kind of take over Christianity and bring it in, the early church, some of the early fathers believed that joy wasn't part of what we should be experiencing. And they began to remove themselves from the rest of society. They're called the Desert Fathers. They do some incredible stuff for God. But they begin to remove themselves from society because all of a sudden they go, well, we're meant to be a people who are being persecuted. And all of a sudden we're in the inn and we don't think this is right. And every so often for us as believers, we go, we shouldn't be experiencing joy. We shouldn't have nice things. We shouldn't have this, that, or the other. And we begin to deny we shouldn't have friends because God has called me to be someone who forges a path on my own. I've looked through the Old Testament at some of the prophets who were there, and they didn't have any friends. So I shouldn't have any either. But we're meant to do life in community and life together. At the same time, I find it difficult to die to self-protectiveness, defensiveness, lack of vulnerability, and judgmentalism. Therefore, we deny the past's impact on our present. We rarely consider how our family of origin, so the family that we come from, and the significant people and events from our past shape our present. That when you go to the doctor asks you a question. And for all our doctors in the room, hopefully they will tell me that I'm right. And they will say, can you give me a history of your health? And they will begin to ask you questions. And they'll begin to ask you questions on all these different things. Has anyone in your family had a heart attack? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, I find it interesting that in the medical realm, they understand that, that things from our parents and grandparents can affect us now. But when it comes to our spiritual life, we go, well, I'm a new creation. That's all done with. But actually, there are things sometimes when you begin to look back that you begin to go, there's a pattern here. And this pattern doesn't seem healthy. I think I've said this before. One of my parents, it's really interesting when you begin to look at our family, that when you look at my granddad's side of the family, no one speaks to each other. So somewhere up there, they've fallen out with each other. And then when you come a line down, all of those kids have fallen out with each other as well, and they don't speak to each other. And then you come a next line down to my generation, and some of my distant relatives aren't speaking to their siblings. And it was interesting, a couple of years ago, me and my sisters went, there's something here, and we don't want that in our family. We don't want anything to stop us from being in community with one another. And we went, actually, what's going on? We don't want this to come. That sometimes things in our past begins to affect our present. That we divide life into secular and sacred compartments. That we easily compartmentalize God to Christian activities while usually forgetting about Him when we are working, shopping, studying, and recreating. Every so often I bump into someone and they don't know I've seen them. And I see them in the street somewhere. And sometimes when I bump into them, they are doing things that they wouldn't do on a Sunday. And sometimes they're using language that they wouldn't use on a Sunday. And I walk, and as they're using it, and whatever language they're using, they turn and they see me, and they go, oh, I'm really sorry, Pastor. But the problem is we decompartmentalize our lives. We say some of it is sacred, some of it is secular, and when we're not in church, everything goes. But that's not the way it is meant to be. That we are doing for God instead of being with God. That we tend to evaluate our spirituality based on how much I am doing for God, how much I am serving. We spiritualize away conflict. I usually miss out on true peace by smoothing over disagreements, burying tension and avoiding conflict, rather than disrupting false peace as Jesus did. We cover brokenness, weakness, and failure. We have a hard time speaking about my weaknesses, failures, and mistakes. We live without limits. That those close to me would say I would often try to do all. I bite off more than I chew. that we judge spiritual journeys of others, that I often find myself occupied and bothered by the faults of others around me. That I can guarantee that in the room that there is at least one of these that we are dealing with. That Saul never ever deals with these insecurities. He never ever deals with those things around him. He never ever fixes it. It says this in 1 Samuel 15:13. Let me see if I can pull it up here. It says, Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king of the people over his people. So listen now to the message of the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel and the way they led them as the camp up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy them, all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death the men and women, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. Do you hear it? Saul is told to go kill everyone, all the Amalekites. So he's told to wipe them all out. Not only is he told to wipe them all out, he's also told to burn everything, to destroy all of the goods, all of the gold, all of the sheep, all of the cattle, to remove it all. That is what he's told to do. But this is what Saul does. It says in verse 9, but Saul and the army spared Agag, and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves, the lambs, and everything that was good. That these they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Now God tells him to destroy everything. Yep. So we've got that. So God tells him to destroy everything, but as he's destroying everything, they see Agag, who is king, and he goes, no, I'll keep you. He sees the best of the cattle and the sheep, and they go, we'll keep you as well. He sees the gold, and he goes, and I'll keep that. All the best stuff, he goes, that we will keep. I think it's A.J. Meyer said these words. He goes, to spare the best of the Amalekites is surely equivalent to sparing some root of evil, some plausible indulgence, some favorite sin. For us, Agag must stand for the evil propensity which exists in all of us for self-gratification. And to spare Agag is to be merciful to ourselves, to exonerate and palliate our failures, and to condone our besetting sin. That all of a sudden Saul is sparing Agag because he's beginning to go, actually it's easier if a king comes against me. I want the king to spare me. That his trust is beginning to wane in God. And this is God's response. He says, I regret I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and he has not carried out my instructions. And in verse 13 it says, when Samuel reached him, Saul said, the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. Saul is so immature at this point that he has no idea that he hasn't done what God told him to do. He has no idea he hasn't fulfilled the task ahead of him. And when asked by Samuel, Saul answers, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites, and they spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Who does Saul blame? He blames the soldiers. He blames the people. Who is Saul? Saul is the king. At this point, Saul is responsible for everything. But because of his insecurity and because he's sure that the men are going to reject him, that in this moment, when he is meant to destroy everything, he allows the men to dictate. And because he allows the men to dictate, he loses his kingship. He loses everything that has been promised over him. That we cannot blame everyone else for what God has told us to do. We cannot begin to use excuses because we are called to a higher calling. Mark reminded us already that Steve Uppel reminded us last week from 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. And Samuel says this over Saul, although you were once small in your own eyes, do you not become head of the tribe of Israel? The Lord anointed you the king of Israel. The issue is that Saul was still small in his own eyes. People of God, you are not small this morning. That God has a destiny and a purpose. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, that you are God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. We need to understand who we are called to be. That Saul pretended to be someone on the outside. He wasn't on the inside, and he was found wanting. On the screen, there's a bunch of questions that are asked that may help you with if you are emotionally healthy or not. We will send them out tomorrow to you. But I want to move quickly. That it says that Saul, that God has rejected him. And all of a sudden he goes and he finds someone else. And we come across, he goes to go find a new king. And at this point, Samuel is sent once again to go find another one. And he's told to go to the house of Jesse. And he arrives at Jesse's house. And when he arrives at Jesse's house, he asks him to give him all of his sons. And he says all the sons are there. And he arrives to the oldest one. And Samuel goes, well, this is what God did last time. He found the best looking, the strongest, the best Eliab. So Eliab is put before him, and Samuel goes, that's the one. And God goes, nope, it's not him. And he says these words. He says, man may look at the out, do not consider his height or appearance, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't look at the things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at his heart. That God is looking at your heart, and he's asking this morning, is it healthy? And he's inviting you into a healthy relationship with him. It says it goes through all 7 sons that are there, and all of them are rejected. And eventually Samuel looks at Jesse and he says, have you got anyone else? And he says, I've got one more. He's in the field. It's really interesting. He doesn't call him David. He doesn't call him by name. He goes, I've got one more, and he's in the field looking after the sheep. Now, the person who looked after the sheep was the servant. So either this means one or two things. It means that Jesse had no money, so he couldn't afford a servant. Or some theologians think something else. They think this. They think that David wasn't a legitimate son. They think that David was Jesse's son, but he wasn't from Jesse's wife. He was from someone else. And all of a sudden, he was cast out. And so the moment that all of his sons were invited, that Jesse went, here are my sons, but that one is not one of mine. And he leaves him in the field. See, he's been rejected by the people. He's been rejected by his father. And all of a sudden, when he's asked, is there anyone else? It's almost as though Jesse goes, oh yeah, I forgot. I've got one more. And he brings him in. And God looks at him and goes, this is the one. And he says these words about David. He says, this is a man after my own heart. It's interesting because later on, when we get to the story of David and Goliath, it says that Goliath comes and begins to say all these words over the Israelites. And David goes, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? And who's the first one to speak against him? His brother Eliab. And he goes, who are you? And why are you here? Should you not be at home looking after the sheep? That his brother goes, you are illegitimate. You are not meant to be here. And David's response is, what have I done now? And all of a sudden David, because he was a man after God's own heart, a man who had emotionally healthy, all of a sudden what the world was telling him, David goes, I don't care. I don't care what everyone around me is saying, because I know that my God can remove this giant. And all of a sudden there was an inner strength within him. And we begin to see a man who, even with his own failure, begins to serve God in a way that is unseen. Who begins to expand the kingdom of Israel like something that is never seen before. That the one thing we never speak about David is that David was a man of insecurity. That all the way through, even as Saul is trying to kill him, David stands there and he refuses. He refuses to allow, he says, I will not harm the Lord's anointed. He refuses to sin. Why? Because he didn't care what everyone else spoke about him. All he cared was, God, what are you speaking over me? What is the identity that you have spoken over me? What is it that is happening? That over these next couple of weeks, I would love to invite you on this journey with us. That we are going to unpack some of the things that I knew that today we weren't going to bring any resolution to some of this stuff. We're just opening a box of worms or a can of worms for you. There's some of you are going to go, I need stuff dealt with. Great, come back next week. Some of you have been dealing with this stuff for 30 years. You'll survive one more week. But for the next 7 weeks, can I invite you to join with us? We're going to unpack all of these different areas. We're going to unpack what it looks like for us to be healthy, for us to begin to look on the inside and say, God, what is the inner monologue within me? What is the story that is going on with you? Maybe you've been a Christian for 40 years and you're still dragging stuff around. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And God wants you to have freedom. That in our small groups over the next 16 weeks, we're going to unpack this. So maybe you want to join a small group and there is stuff that goes along it. I think there is a slide behind me that there is some resources that go with this. And in those resources, it's some of the things that we are going to be going through, and you can go, here it is at home. So you can buy this at home if you want, and you can do this journey with us. There is a workbook with us. There is a bigger book that goes alongside, and there's a day-to-day sort of devotional that walks through all of this stuff. Can I encourage you to do that, to buy it? I think it's about £30. For some of us, it's a lot of money. For some of us, it's not that much money. But I promise you, if you engage in this with us, your life will be transformed. You will look back and you will go, wow, look what God has done in me. And over these next 10 weeks we're looking at, because we're taking 2 breaks. And one for Easter and one for Mother's Day. Because on Mother's Day, I don't want to do a sermon on tears, depression, and sorrow. But we're going to do this together as a family. And sometimes it's going to be difficult. And every Sunday over the next couple of weeks, you're going to wake up in the morning and go, I don't want to go in today. I don't want to go. You're going to hide in the luggage. And God is going to invite you and say, you're maybe hiding, but I still see you. And I'm still calling you. And I'm still inviting you into a new identity. Why don't you stand with me? Scripture tells us sorrow may last for the night, but joy is coming in the morning. We were never meant to drag the old man with us. See, we are a new creation. The old is gone, the new is here. That some of you are still holding on to pain and grief from 30 years ago. And God is saying it's time to let it down. It's time to let it go. That some of you are sitting and you're feeling like God has called you to something bigger. And your response is, not me. You've got the wrong person. Surely it is someone else. Surely you are calling someone else. That one of my favorite scriptures is Isaiah 6. And you've probably heard me say this before, where God looks and he says, whom shall I send? Whom will go for us? And what I love about it is, he asks Isaiah, and there's no one else there. So Isaiah can't turn and go, I think he's calling the person to the right or the person to the left. He's standing there and he's going, he's calling me. And the reason I know he's calling me is because I'm the only one who is here. This morning, God is calling you. He's not calling the person to your right or the person to your left. He is calling you. And he's inviting you on a journey that will transform your life. It will transform your business. It will transform your family. you will see things happen in these next 10 weeks. At the end of it, you will go, wow, see, I'm a new creation. The old is gone. The new is here.